Hi, my name is Felicity Sibindi. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Make Way program with VSL. The Make Way program is a 5-year program working across East and Southern Africa. We work in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Zambia. We work on the intersection of reproductive health and rights and advocacy, bringing capacity building to civil society organizations across these countries, working closely with governments, working with service providers, and working with the youth who are our key advocates and the voice of the program. We welcome you to this discussion session from the Make Way program with the consortium partners, with our allies in the space, looking at decolonizing narratives around queerness in Africa. Working with marginalized communities is central to the work we do as Make Way. And coming from the Feminist Foreign Policy Conference here in the Netherlands, we've been talking to a lot of policymakers, governments, allied partners, donor organizations about what it means to do LGBT work on the continent. We've been mostly facing the global north, but if we're really serious about decolonizing, we want to talk to our African partners. We want to talk to our African governments. We want to talk to civil society. We want to have a message that really speaks to the people on the ground. So as part of that, we're joined by an amazing panel of experts, theologians, academics, activists, people working in the development space, who will be sharing a little bit more about what it looks like to work on advocacy and LGBT programming on the continent. I am joined here by Reverend Adera Godfrey Owino, a pastor at the Cosmopolitan Affirming Church in Nairobi, a theologian and a researcher. Welcome, Adera.
Thank you so much.
Next to Adera, I'm joined by Professor Zethu Matebeni, the South African Research Chair in Sexualities, Gender and Queer Studies at Hare University. Welcome.
Thank you.
To my left, I have Quinter Obiero, a Make Way Youth Panel member, founder of the Equal Voices organization in rural Kenya, a queer activist and a human rights advocate. Finally, I'm joined by Monica Tabengwa, a policy specialist at the UNDP. Welcome. Reverend Adera, moving to you. Could you share a little bit more about yourself?
Thank you so much. So as you said, my name is Adera Godfrey. I come from Kenya. I was born in western part of Kenya. I have lived most of my life in the city of Nairobi. And so every time I always say I'm a village boy from Kenya, but living as a city boy in Nairobi. I am a priest in the Anglican Church and a pastor in an LGBTQI plus church called Cosmopolitan Affirming Church. I am a theologian and I identify as queer. So if I'm asked just to say 3 things about me, about my identity, I would say I am Adera, I am Black, queer, clergy from Kenya. That's all.
Thank you, Adera. Yeah. It's so nice to have you on this panel.
Yeah.
Prof. Zethu, could you share a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. My name is Zethu Matebeni. I go by Zethu because some people find it difficult to say my full name. I'm based in South Africa. And as you said, I'm based at a university and I work at universities. So I've been an academic most of my life. And a big part of my life actually has been working on developing a field of African queer studies. I've done tons of research in that field, written extensively in that field, and I've been teaching. I think my biggest passion is to do different kinds of forms of education, educating people around what it means to be queer in Africa, and also just to give people an appreciation of gender diversity and sexual diversity coming from our continent. And also to introduce different ways of thinking about sexualities and gender from an African perspective, but also from a decolonial perspective. So that's who I am. Thanks.
It is exciting to have you on this panel.
Thank you.
Quinter, our firebrand activist. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you so much, Felicity. I'm Quinter Obiero from Kenya, and my story is slightly different from Adera's. Adera is partly a village boy and also a city boy. But for me, I'm exclusively a village person. Yeah, so I was born and raised in the western part of Kenya, some small village in Hare County. And that is where I grew up, and that is where I live currently. And as a queer person, I feel that the village life has somehow shaped me in a way. And for instance, if I would share, Sibindi mentioned that I'm also a founder of an organization in the rural. It's called the Equal Voices Organization. And this organization came into being by we are just a group, around 5 queer people from Sierra County. We sat together and thought that, what if we could come together and do something? Yeah? Because before we used to travel all the way to the city, to Kisumu, to just meet a group of queer people. And we thought that now we are 5. We are already a group, because Adera will tell you that the Bible says where the 2 or more people are gathered. Yeah, so we saw that 5 is already a group that we could come together and do something. So we thought that we could do something in the rural for ourselves instead of traveling all the way to go and jump into other people's gatherings. So that is how Equal Voices came into being, and we are so proud of ourselves right now. We are around 20 queer people organizing in the rural area, and it feels so good, as much as we are facing challenges, but those are some of the successes that we can speak about.
Yeah, it's so great to have rural voices also in such a big conference as well. So welcome, and thank you for joining this panel. Monica, our policy expert in the big offices. Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Felicity. Well, I work for UNDP as a policy specialist, and I work for a small unit. We call it the Inclusive Governance Initiative. It's a small project that we started in 2019, and it's a regional project that basically we work on LGBTI inclusion in Africa. So that really supporting all the UNDP offices to work more strategically on LGBTI inclusion. But my personal history, I am from Botswana. I grew up there. I'm a lawyer by training, and I work and live in South Africa. I think, as you can imagine, the differences of, having grown up in Botswana and then, living in South Africa as a Black queer woman, it shapes who you are and how you interact. I also come from quite a big family. I'm number 6 in 8 children, and 2 girls. And so it was always a fight just to get your voice heard. I think possibly that's why I became a lawyer, was, to challenge some of the dynamics. My father wasn't there. And so we were brought up by a single parent. And just, watching what happens, as my mother was navigating through society, trying to access simple things like land, get us into schools, was, there was always need for someone male to assist. And, kind of drove me to want to change the status quo. And so my first job was as a legal aid officer in a women's rights organization. And I've basically worked around that all my life, and I've expanded that. And that included founding an organization in Botswana, which is the Lesbians and Gays and Bisexuals of Botswana. which is now very well and successful, challenging, legally and everywhere. And I've also been ED of Pan African ILGA. So I've really been involved in the shaping of, rights for marginalized communities, especially LGBTI. And I'm happy to be here, and hopefully, what I share can help, make this policy, to serve the people that need the protection and the access.
Thank you so much for joining. And we're so honored to have a member of the panel that created the Yogi Carter Principles. And just to celebrate this All Africa panel, all queer panel, it's truly a moment of, I think celebration is the right word, particularly looking for moments of hope in this landscape where economy is an issue, where safety and security are an issue, where decolonization is becoming a trend, but what does it mean in practice? What does it mean to make the small steps, the easy steps that we can reach as Africans, as civil society, as people working in these spaces, as people working with organizations and governments? I'll come to you, Adera. We've been having discussions about what it means to work in the religious space.
Yeah.
Within the LGBT space, religious leaders have been a key force in driving the anti-gender movement, the anti-LGBT movement. We see this happening in Kenya. We see really troubling developments in Uganda. What does it mean to work in that space, in a space that doesn't necessarily welcome you as a queer person? What does it mean for internalized homophobia, for those people who claim to be allies depending on the space? Could you tell us a bit more about your journey with that?
Interesting question. And if you ask me to talk about my journey with that, it's such a long journey, so I don't know where to begin, where to cut it. But I will begin with what the context presents. So the context, one, what it gives you a script that you must live. That for a man or for a boy, this is what it means to be a boy. And part of what it means to be a boy is to love girls, is to run after girls. And it means to dress in a particular way. It means to act in a particular way. And so you begin growing, and that's the script you find. And that's what you believe is normal. But deep down you realize that that's not who I am. I can't play this script because that's not who I am. I am different. I can't behave like a boy should behave like that script says. And so as you grow up, the first thing you realize is that there's something wrong with me. And so it begins to get to levels where people talk about it. And so you kind of say, yeah, I know it's me they're talking about. So it comes with low self-esteem. Then it comes with hiding. And then it comes with other things. Sometimes it even comes with like a thought of harming yourself because you feel like I'm an outcast here. Basically because of the script that you're born and you found that this is what is existing and this is how boys should be. And then to strengthen that script, or the fuel for that script, is religion, or sometimes even cultural narratives. So you go to church every time and the only sin the pastor talks about is homosexuality. And they keep saying some things like Sodom and Gomorrah, Paul says what, who does what. And so you leave your community where you already feel you are so much an outcast. You go to a place you feel church, there should be love, there should be fairness, there should be equality. And in church, you get the heaviest clobber. That so you're a sinner, you're hellbound, and all these things. And then so because that's what you grow up with, you believe it's true. You believe that's something that there's something wrong with you. And so beginning to undo that is a process. But as you undo that, there is also a legal context. There is a political context that issues of LGBTIQ plus are used for political mileage. People bringing bills towards the election. And because they know the community, the scripts there have allowed that hating homosexuality or hating and hurting LGBTIQ plus people gives you mileage politically. So they use it as a political, something for political mileage. And so growing up, you're also in that context. And then the law begins to say that you're criminal. You're just a criminal for being who you are. You haven't hurt anyone. You haven't said nothing to no one, but you're just a criminal. So all that environment, you begin growing and you get a script and moving. So it's so challenging. For me, my story with navigating that, growing up as a small boy in rural Kenya, and I like what Quinter said about rural Kenya. The concept of rural in Kenya, in our place, is called Gweng. Gweng is a place, people say Gweng is a place where it's not just remote. It's a place where people can't think. It's a place where there's no good thing that happens in Gweng. And so growing up in Gweng, I didn't have a lot of role models. I didn't have a lot of information about who I was. And so the first time I hear the word gay, I am 14 years old and I'm in high school. All my life as a kid, I just like playing with boys, and there is what is called in my language, chamama na chababa, a game where children begin to imitate their parents. Like I am the dad, I'm the mom. So the mom is cooking, the dad is doing what. And for me, like, I can't do that. I don't want to be a dad. I want to be a mom. And for me, that was okay for me because it was child's play. So I go to high school, and the first time I hear the word gay or homosexuality, all the boys in our school, somebody says they were caught having sex. And so the first gay parade, a bad parade this is, they're brought to the school assembly, the school parade, and the principal says, he uses the word faggots, that these faggots are not human beings. It's a thing that only happens either if you're mad, if you're having a biological problem, or it only happens in Europe. And so there is no place for faggots in this country, in this place. That's the first time I put a name to what I've been feeling all my life. So I am a fag, and I'm not even part of this community. I'm a mzungu, I'm a white person, or I'm an animal. And so then moving forward, you begin to hide, like, hey, if I'm caught, I will be kicked out of school and everything else. And so then I do what Christians do. I go to Jesus. Oh, Jesus, save me. Oh, Jesus, remove this thing that makes me this. And I pray a lot about it, and nothing happens. The more I pray, the more the feelings grow. And I'm like, yeah. So eventually I make peace with this, and I say, this is who God made me to be. And I'm saying that knowing that God made gay people. So this is who God made me to be. And I have no other script to play. This is who I am. And so acceptance comes after trying a lot of things. It comes after even trying to commit suicide. It comes after hurting yourself, hating yourself, and everything. I'm in a place where I have accepted myself, and so my work is to help people also navigate that space by beginning to undo that narrative that it is wrong to be gay, it is wrong to be who God made you to be, that culture does not accept you. And so the way I'm doing it currently is, let's talk about those scripts. Let's talk about those things and let people just be people.
Indeed.
Yeah.
You're highlighting such important aspects. You're highlighting language. You're highlighting that when there was that school parade that you thought, I am white, I am worthy of shame. That language of shaming from the religious perspective, and if we're looking at decolonizing queerness in Africa and the role of religion and the power that religion has in ideas of dignity, in ideas of what is correct, the correct way to be, what bridging terms do you think the church can bring to this space? How do we identify, first of all, the language around shame, but also where can we go from here? How can we get to the next step that liberates people from the internalized parts of the shame that come with this?
So we can begin to look at, where did that begin to happen? If you go to many African histories, sex and sexualities and sex talks and kinkiness were things that people did so openly. It wasn't something to be ashamed of. And so contact with Western missionary enterprise that came to Africa begins to tag some of those things as barbaric, as awkward. So attaching shame to it, so that then sex and identities do not become a thing to celebrate, it becomes a thing to be ashamed about. And so I would begin that with contacts to Western missionaries, to Arab traders, that then brings the language of shame to sex and sexuality and expressing it publicly. So then it removes sex from and sexuality from a public space and throws it to something private, something you need to be ashamed about. So going there, then we'd want to then go, so what do we do? Could we go back to that history that we lost along the way? And I'm not saying that was a completely good history. I'm not trying to say that African history or culture before missionaries, before Arab trade was a good thing. It had all weaknesses and all bad things in it. But it's proper to revisit some of those celebrations of multiple identities, celebration of publicly expression of who you are. We need to go back to those things and reclaim them. And then coming to Christianity, if being a Christian means to be a child of God, if being a Christian means to be created by a God, then that God created everybody. There is no one else that wasn't created by that God. He made all the bodies. So we can even go back to creation and begin to demystify what people always say, that God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And you would want to look for even other accounts of creation in the Bible. For example, I would go to Psalms 139 that says, my body was known to you before it was formed. This frame that I have was known to you before I was born. That in my mother's womb, you knit me bit by bit. So God knitting bit by bit everybody, not just particular bodies. We would want to go back to those and revisit some of those other accounts of creation as Christians. I would also want to go back to our own African myths of creation. I'm calling them myths because of lack of a better word, but our own African account of creation is more powerful. Like in my own tradition, God did not create male and female. God created. It says God created the earth. He put everything in the earth. He brought animals. He brought everything else, and then God brought people to live in that particular land. And so, in ordering of society, it now says that God gave us someone called Ramogi. Like God raised a leader called Ramogi. And so our creation story has no male, female. It's God brought people and raised a leader, not raising, a male and a female. So if we could revisit some of those histories, other accounts of creation in the Bible, then we could begin to shift the narrative.
We could begin to build and find bridging terms, sort of hooks, things we can hold on to.
Yeah.
In our conversations, I think you're touching on interesting parts. For instance, how did we define ourselves? We had a moment where we spoke about the concept of Ubuntu, being a non-gender term, a gender-free term. And we will get there with Prof. Zethu when it comes to language. Earlier, you also mentioned traditional cultural ideas. Within the African community, our traditional spaces also hold queerness, but within community. As a Zimbabwean, you often find that Isangoma is someone who has a queer identity, very often, not always, but often. And that person has a role within society. And it was always an accepted role. In fact, it was an important role. It was an advisory role. Someone who exists between the frames of gender, someone who is neither male or female, has perspectives for the community which would protect a community. Do you have such examples in Kenya?
Yeah, there are those examples in Kenya. And I would begin with the aspect of spirits. And here I am not saying holy and evil spirits like Christianity has taught us that there's some bad and good spirits. I'm talking about familiar spirits like, for example, people that we know died long ago. And so what happens is that there are particular people who then embodied those spirits. There are two words I would use here. There's a concept called Onek and Mugawe. These were like traditional religious healers who embodied particular familiar spirits. For example, it said that Mugawe would embody a female spirit. And these were men. And they would be married to other men. And so it's the work that the spirits have assigned them to do is to be a healer, but the spirit that works through him to heal people is a spirit that people would call it a familiar female spirit. It's something that is known. And then they're married to other men and they would live that way. I would call that queer. And yesterday I learned from Prof. Zethu's presentation about language that at that time there were nothing like gay, lesbian, and all these, acronyms that we now have currently. But that is something I would call queer. This is a man married to another man, and not just like he's married, he's also playing an important role in the community. They are a healer. They are someone that people go to and find help. They are someone that people go to and people find healing. And so there are those stories in our cultures that I also think we could revisit. I live in a space where gay marriages or queer marriages is illegal, and that comes with a lot of problems. But going back to history, you would retrieve some of those stories that Mugawes were men married to other men, and they lived in harmony in their communities. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Prof. Zethu, you have shared so much about this during the conference. Looking at language, the role of language, the definitions, the limitations of the LGBT acronym, do you recognize these moments that Adera is speaking to? What does that say to you?
Thanks, Felicity. I mean, I recognize many things that Adera says. And I'm really inspired by your story and your bravery.
Oh, thanks.
Because we know how difficult it is to be in a religious space and be able to speak out. But not only speak out, but offer an alternative. And I think many people seek that alternative. So, I really admire the work that you do.
Thank you for the information.
Yeah. May you continue to be blessed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was the spirits.
Yes.
A Mugabe spirit.
Yes, no, it's there. I can see it.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So, there's so many things that you were saying that I wanted to talk about. The first is the issue of the script.
Yeah.
Okay, let me say there's two issues.
Yeah.
And I want to unpack them a little bit. So the first is the issue of the script. And if I forget the second issue, I'll say it now. The second is I want to talk about the concept umuntu. Because it talks about this issue of spirituality.
Yeah.
So the first script, you use the term script, and I think it's important because we also need to figure out, or we need to understand how we as in just people around this table, how we got to the scripts that we now subscribe to. Who brought those scripts? And what is a script? Yeah, when you go to the doctor, you get a script. It's a set of instructions of what to do or what to take to make yourself feel better. So we got scripts.
Yeah.
Our life was scripted. When?
Yeah.
And by whom?
Yeah.
Okay. And really the first script that we got was early on in Berlin, where a group of men, just like us here, sitting here around a table, designed and located where each of them would take over in the continent that we call Africa. One would say, oh, I like Southwest Africa. That is now Namibia. And the other says, oh, I like this particular place. I like what is now called Angola. I like South Africa. They were all scripting. And what they did, they were also not only scripting how it is that we cannot speak the same language, also scripting that we need to be distant from each other, and also scripting us on how to be closer to them, to forget about who we are. And that is really our first script. And that script is is the problem that we are living in now. And it's a script designed many, many, many years ago, and we are still living it. And with that script came a whole range of things. One of it was really also an economic thing to come and take from everything, because at that time Europe was going through a crisis. So they came and looted all of our resources, extracted everything, made Europe wealthy, made us feel like slaves, took away the land. We had no land. With that, then they enforced a set of ways in how we should be governed, or how we should govern, how they should govern us. That was also the religion. Yeah, a set of practices to say, okay, for you to be a good person, you now need to do this. And actually, you were not even a person. For you to be a good thing that we can use, that makes you valuable for us, you need to subscribe to these other scripts. So the scripts were so layered, and they continue to be layered. There's a script, a subscript, a superscript, or whatever, and we continue to live in these scripts. And the challenge, of course, is that over the years, we've come to accept these scripts as a norm. And not only accept them, but we've come to live with them as the thing to do. So many people who are decolonizing would even say, should we even be engaging with Christianity? Which is a valid thing, because it was a script. And what did that script do? Because there's an assumption that when these scripts arrived, when the colonials arrived, there was nothing. There was something. But a lot of those things then were erased and removed from our bodies, our consciousness, from our history. And now we want to return to African history, as if African history disappeared. It never disappeared. They erased it. But it actually sits in our bodies. Enslaved people will tell you, like every time they hear something about slavery, they still cry and they feel it in their bodies. Colonialism happened so many years ago, but we feel it in our bodies. Yeah, the fact that we cannot, like, if I want to give thanks or to praise or do whatever, the quickest thing is, oh, I must go to God before I can go to Kamata and before I can go to my ancestors, who actually are with me all the time.
I feel them around you now.
Yes, they're here with us. So I think it's very important to always also be critical and disrupt these kinds of scripts, and not take them as not take them as things that society is about. And that's challenging, but you are doing that work, and we are also trying. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is this notion of spirituality. And I want to link it to queer, to this term queer, because you asked about language. I like to be a little bit provocative sometimes. African people, and I'm going to be bold. African people are spiritual people. In actual fact, we are spirit. Because our first form of existence is to be called umuntu. Muntu, the Bantu, abantu, abanobuntu. Yes? And this phrase, we find it throughout the continent. Yeah? The core of that is the last part, the ndu, which you see in umuntu, in abantu, and ubuntu. And the ndu is the spirit. And it is the thing that connects all of us. Yeah? And we talk about this, the spirit of Ndu, which is in each of us. And it is a thing that we try to use to find our being and our connection, to undo that initial script. And so it's a complicated thing, because a lot of people now, because of the other script is a very strong script, right? And if we talk about spirituality is also a very powerful thing. And it's a powerful thing that we can actually use to galvanize or to mobilize against other forces. But it becomes scary for many African people, because the script that we received made us believe that when we focus on our spirituality of Ndu, we are ungodly and unchristian. Yeah? That's why it will be scared, like, oh, this person is a sangoma. Stay away. This person is, they've gone to Twasa, they've gone to, to the bush to go and learn, and we're scared of that. Yeah? Because the other script says the best way to be civilized is to take the script of the colonizer, of the Western person.
That is something.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's
Because
absolutely.
like in many African languages, we don't share so many things in our languages, but the concept of Mtu, it's all over Africa.
Yeah.
In Kenya, we say Mtu.
Yes.
And so it's interesting. Yeah.
And it's something, for instance, in my journey with queerness as well, what I've struggled with the acronym, with the LGBTQ+ acronym, what you've defined now might explain my struggle. I've not been able to claim that acronym. First of all, because I don't believe that my sexuality should be what leads my identity. So even the concept of coming out, I find it not applicable to my geography. Coming out to who, for what, for where, in which cupboard, right?
For what,
This,
for where,
I don't have the cupboard to come out of. And then the very siloed, this is what a lesbian is, this is what a bisexual person is, this is what, if you are anything that doesn't fit that script, you are not legitimate. And then those scripts come with economy. Particularly working in this space, working with LGBTQ+ organizations, and having to be legitimate in the space and legitimate to get funding. This tension has been something I've not been personally able to hold. Does that come out in your work with academia, in Reclaiming African, your book about centering the African story? How do you see this?
It's a very tricky thing. So, I'm always not taking two positions, but I always have to locate myself in two different spots. One as a person who is critical of many of the things that I see in the world, and trying to offer alternative ways of seeing, but also as a person who exists in society and having to deal with these things on a daily basis, right? So, as that person, yes, the acronym LGBTIAQ+, okay? At some point, well, when I started my activism, Monica will attest, it was actually just the G. Yeah. And then the gays were like, okay, well, there are these women who are actually irritating, so let's include them. Then the L came, yeah? So gays and lesbians, yeah? And then it's like, oh, there's some people who are here who are actually attracted to both of us. Okay, so let's have the LGB. And then over time, it's like, oh, what's happening now? Why do we see these else who are moving themselves towards the G's. What's happening? Yeah, and then T. And this is a very simplistic way of putting it, because we know that actually, historically, trans was always there. But I'm also trying to show the ways in which this acronym has actually has invisibilized and erased certain lived realities. Yeah, so there's a reason why the word gay floats around more than others. And it's mostly because gay is associated with the white male able-bodied, and we have to talk about that, yeah? And that power, the power of the circulation of that word. But anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is that the acronym keeps growing. And in its growth, what is happening with it is that the differences become less visible. Yeah, lesbian struggles are no longer visible. Trans struggles will disappear, because now what is happening is that, in actual fact, in that term, we rarely even talk about the I. Yeah, in actual fact, LGBT has nothing to do with I. Yes, we don't even know how to engage with that. Okay, A, we're not even saying A's, because we're like, what is the point of your existence? Because remember, all of us, the three of us here, are linked together by sexual orientation and sexuality. And now there's A. How? How can you be asexual in this space? Okay. Yeah. And then the P is like, you are pansexual. Okay, fine. We'll let you in. Okay. And then the Q, which I will come to. And then we got like, okay, we don't know anymore. Let's just say plus. In other contexts, there's 2 at the top, LGBTQIA plus, and then there's a 2, meaning two-spirit. Very complicated. But one of the reasons why, Felicity, and I agree with you, you don't find yourself, your expression being captured in that, is how, one, this acronym, as I said, has invisibilized lived realities. So LGBTIQA plus is supposed to be the same all over the world. How is that possible?
No, it's not possible.
You live in a rural context in Kenya. Like, how can your struggles be the same as somebody living in Amsterdam? There is no way. Yeah. And so there's that invisibility of the particularities of our struggles. There's also the way in which that term has traveled from elsewhere, and we've just had to take it on. Yeah, I mean, many people actually don't even know how to say LGBTQIA plus. The late Nyavanga Wainana said, he used to say, this acronym, these people of the acronym, and would say, you are all ligibits. Ligibits. Yeah, and I like that, because it's like, we have to make meaning of what this thing is. Yeah. Like, why are we an acronym? Why are you MSM? Why do you accept to be MSM? Yeah. You know, so we cannot be an acronym. And why I like referring to Pinyabang is, but he said you need to, you know, if you want to identify yourself, you need to have a thing that makes meaning. So you are going to be a ligibit. We are all ligibits.
I feel that struggle, because connecting it to what you're asking about coming out, I was like, so I come out as who to who? But then for me, I was like, okay, so am I bisexual? I don't know what that even means. And then so to be safe, I'm saying like I'm queer, because that is a bit clouded. People don't know what it means. And then now like I'm gay. So what I did to myself, I said, I'm not coming out. I am coming home to myself. And so just accepting that whatever thing I am, that is me. And I don't care about anything else. What I want to do with it, I am home with myself. I don't need any letter to define me. I don't need any scripture, any script. I'm just home with myself.
Yeah.
So it's no longer coming out, it's coming home to me.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. So coming home. Some people also say the critical version is that you're actually coming into this category. Yeah, and that's why, and that's the power of this idea of coming out.
Indeed.
You're not coming out to the world. You're actually coming into a closet of LGBT.
Into community.
Yes, you're coming into something.
Indeed.
And yeah, we have to think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly coming into a community, coming into a space of safety, where you have safety networks. What I have seen working within the LGBTQ plus development work side is a separation from the target group, this idea of a target group, and being put sort of supra the community. You have to make decisions as an individual. We must empower the youth to make their decisions alone, separate from the gatekeepers, the religious, separate from their parents,
I'm a
separate.
gate opener, or the gatekeeper.
You hold the keys.
Separate. In isolation. Quinter, in your experience in rural areas, how has that been? Have this experience of identifying in a particular language, working with organizations who work in the space, how has that been marrying the work and your community and your role in the community?
Wow, I'm still thinking about Ubuntu because we in Swahili we talk about mtu, watu, and I've never thought of it in that way. So I have.
Say mtu ni watu.
Yeah, mtu ni watu.
One spirit.
Yeah, yeah. So that's very interesting. Yeah. So just to respond to you, I feel that I feel that the language thing is still a struggle because like you were struggling, I've also realized right now that I've been struggling with it because I was also born and I found LGBTQI plus existing, then I joined. Yeah, without really knowing what I was joining. And like I joined the letters. So
thank you for saying
yes,
that.
because I
Came into the letter.
Yeah.
yes, I joined the letters, yeah, without really asking myself, where did this language come from, yeah? And a lot of people I know, especially in the rurals right now, as God.
Thank you for that. Professional. No, you say,
Speak for
they say
yourself.
professional.
As a professional lesbian.
Yes, as the professional lesbian was talking,
Say professional.
Okay with that,
okay.
Monica.
As Professor was speaking, and I was thinking to myself now, back home in the rural, now that I have this information, how am I even going to tell people back home that now, by the folks, we need to talk about this thing. Where did this language thing come from? I've been listening to you and I'm thinking, God, now how am I going to start? Where do I start from? Because in the where I come from, not most of us have the privilege to go to school. Especially, I will speak mostly about the masculine presenting people because in our schools we have school uniforms that we have to have, and the females have to wear skirt or dresses, and the males have to wear shorts or the trousers. And you find that when, for example, myself right now, I wouldn't feel so much comfortable going to school in a skirt. Yeah, so you find that I'd rather quit school. Yeah, so you find that most masculine presenting folks do not complete their schools. Yeah, so they do not have that kind of knowledge to even think that these letters, what do they mean? So it's really really troubling me right now. Yes, I don't know. Yes, in a good way though. Yeah, so, and most of the time you find that, just like you mentioned, my experience back home is not the same as someone else's experience here in Amsterdam. Yeah? So I feel that it's important to also give us, people like us, space to speak. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity because I'm able to speak for myself, not have someone else speak for me, someone who is not wearing my shoes. Yeah, yeah. So I feel that even in coming up with the solutions, I feel that we should always be involved in coming up with the solutions because right now in Kenya, just like Adera mentioned, there are some bills and laws that are coming up that do not protect the rights of everyone. Huh? Yeah, and you find that these rights mostly affect queer people. And as a queer person, I normally tend to feel that, yes, the laws are good. It's good to have good laws. But again, maybe I haven't reached there, but I feel that it's important that before we even have the good laws, we can start from changing the narratives from the rural areas, because we can have good laws, really good laws, but if the people that we live with in the village do not accept this, the law will not be, it won't work, because for example, this is a community of people. Let's say in Bondo. Bondo is where we stay. These people do not they're so much rooted into religion, and they think that homosexuality is a sin. But the law in Kenya says homosexuality is not a sin, and people are allowed to be who they are. I feel that still it will not work, because these are the people that we live with in where we live. They do not agree to this, but the law agrees. Before we even reach the law, these people will have killed us here. Yeah, so I feel that as much as we are trying to push for favorable laws, I feel much work needs to be done back home before we even get to the laws
At the court, yeah.
Yes.
Quinter, what you shared about the school uniforms, I found that really touching. The issue with the way we are expressing ourselves in our communities, in our surroundings, that's something that I've seen create challenges with communities. What does it mean to be visible within your community as someone who is within the queer, the queer community?
Thank you again. And I would say that visibility as a queer person in the rural is somehow, for myself, is not easy, but for others, for example, those who are not masculine, it's quite easy, and it's very easy to navigate, because the way they walk, or the way they talk, or the way they dress is according to what the society expects of them. But you see, for trans people or masculine presenting people, it's kind of very difficult, because the society wants you to go this way, but you want to go this other way, which most of the time brings about violence within the community, because sometimes you find that you just dressed, you're walking, you're going on your errand, and some border guys just ask you, do you want to be a man? Yeah? Or are you a man? And you can't talk back to these people, because they're a group of 10 and you're just one person. And you start thinking in your head, what if I speak back, and what happens next? Yeah. So most of the time we just coil back and just take the verbal violences lightly, which should not be the case. But we do that because most of the time there's nothing we can do about it. And just to mention also, in most of the churches, most of us, I do not go to church mostly, because of the dressing code. Yeah, because most of the churches that we have in the rural area have that if you want to come to this church, if you're a female at birth, you have to dress this way, and if you're male, there's a male dress code, and this most of the time blocks us from even going to such social gatherings, yeah, because we do not want to conform to the societal ways. Yeah. So it becomes very difficult most of the time.
It's so important what you raised, the moralizing aspects of religion and influence on society. Looking at your community, your rural community, are there examples in the past where there were safe spaces? You've spoken about female at birth presenting people. Are there other examples looking at men and spaces where they were safe in the past?
Yeah, to just speak before, in the villages, unlike cities, it's like a homestead, where we have several houses, and before people lived together as a family with that sense of siblinghood, where anyone's kid could sleep in anyone's house. Yeah, so you'll find that before the females or the female people could be allowed to leave their parents' houses and come to their grandparents' houses at night to sleep. Yeah, and you find that these are some of the safe spaces that before were available, because obviously if you're going to sleep at night, who will be coming around to check what you're doing in your room? Yeah, so this felt like a safe space for people before, but right now it's not so much. It's not so much because I don't know where we lost the siblinghood and the love. Yeah, so that used to happen before.
Maybe to just add to what Quinter is saying, first of all, about the violence, it is so targeted that it's only for masculine presenting people who have identified as either lesbians or trans people. Because, and I can say this looking at the camera, many celebrities in Kenya do not conform to what Kenyan societies expect of women and men to look like. A celeb will just come to the public, is a man dressed like a woman, and people celebrate them. A female, a celebrity will just come to the public dressed like a man and presenting fully like a man, and does that even for so long, like for a whole year, for clout, and people celebrate them. So this target about like expression of either masculinity or femininity is so targeted to particular people, to LGBTQI plus people. And then the issue of safe space, like they are saying about grandmothers' places for girls and grandfathers' places for boys. Of course, there are people who've done research about that. In that language, it's called Duol and Siwinde. Duol was a place where grandmothers would socialize girls in a particular way, which I have struggles with, because for them, they also give them the same script we talked about. And Siwinde was for boys. But one safe space we can talk about also for boys in the village place. I said I'm a village boy, but also a city boy. There is at a particular age, culture requires you not to live in your father's house. And so your father, whether poor or rich, must build a boy's house, something called Simba, a place where that's the house for my son. And so what would happen for us who are boys who love boys, what you would do is, it was very easy to tell your parent that because you haven't built my Simba, I'm going to sleep in so-and-so Simba. It was easy to go to your boyfriend's Simba and have fun the whole time, and no one asks any questions. But then I wouldn't find that like a very safe space, but it's a hiding space, because then if somebody would know what happens in those Simba, they would even burn them down. But so there were those particular places that would open some window for just being you in the village, but they were not as safe. Yeah, yeah. And even the grandmother's place is not as safe because then you're socialized. Like for someone who is masculine presenting, your grandmother would be told by other women, make that girl a girl. Yes, do not allow that girl to look like a man. So not as safe.
It's so interesting, the sort of transition over time, right? That there was a time where there was an acceptance. Also, certain figures in Zimbabwe, we have this cross-dressing man who was very popular in the 80s and the liberation movement, and it was totally socially accepted. Growing up, I'm in my late 30s now. Growing up, we didn't have LGBTQ plus work in development space. My mother was a development worker, but we all had an uncle, sisters, someone in the neighborhood who we knew was queer, and it was totally fine. There was no, it wasn't an issue. It wasn't something that was in the news. And then over time, this shifted. And as organizations working in the space, how far are we being part of that shift? And how does that come in with power and positionality? And coming from Legabibo, Pan African ILGA, holding that power when going into communities, holding the power of aspiration, where people want to work at the UN, you know, people want to work in NGO jobs, they tend to be good paying as well. So when we're going into communities, we're going in there with a lot of authority. We're going in there and creating expectations. Can you speak more about your experience with that within communities?
Yeah, I'll try. I was listening to Quinter talking about, you know, the rules about, you know, dress. And I mean, training as a lawyer, you know, just the dress, you know, all of this, there are rules and you are told you can't, you couldn't put on pants to go into court at the beginning, and you couldn't have hair like like mine to go to court. And literally, the judges say, "I cannot hear you. I will. You cannot be seen," and that meant you are not dressed properly, right? And what we've done. And that comes again, that's the power that you're talking about. And I'm a lawyer, so I was able to always use that to push certain, get certain privileges for myself, right? And just, you could sue and say, you're discriminating me for being, you know, it's a cultural thing, or it's just, you know, it's an expression thing. And so you using those same scripts, the Constitution, and so on and so forth. And that's the power sometimes that comes with positionality, where you are, who you are, and what you embody, what, you know, what you have, what tools you have to kind of access some of these spaces. Just to come back to the question that you're talking about, you know, we work at different stages. There are those like Quinter who work in the rural, in the grassroots, and there are others who, you know, lead in big organizations, and there's the UN like myself. And I think it's to appreciate and understand where you are and what it means to sit in that chair, or, you know, stand in that space, and who you engage with, right? I think once you understand what you can bring and what it means to the rest of the community, you know, I think you can then really use that power that you have, you know, in a way that benefits the most people. And for me, I've worked from the grassroots, you know, providing legal aid to very poor women, and you know, trying to get Le Habibo registered in Botswana, and then moving on to Pan African ILGA, and now I'm at the UN, and that's, you know, kind of, I'm hoping keeps going up, but so, and you know, when when you are at the bottom, you are dealing with people at the top. You are dealing with donors coming and telling you, okay, we have money for this. That means you are being told, this is what you need to do. This is the proposal you need to write. And we are working on gender mainstreaming, for instance. What does that even mean, right? For people in the village who they are dealing with gender-based violence. They are dealing with, in all its manifestations, whether it's just getting maintenance for your children, or even getting custody of your children, or fighting actual, physical violence, and so what does that mean when you're being told, no, we are working only on this, right? How do you make that work for people? Because then it's been defined already, and the priorities for people on the ground are different. And I think that's where it's problematic, and where today we are saying we are trying to improve, those kind of engagement. When we say feminism, right? We are saying there is power in being a donor, in going to the community and trying to work with that community. How do you engage? Yeah, you may have written a beautiful script, a beautiful policy, but how do you make sure that that policy actually builds up people rather than takes away? So it's about empowering rather than disempowering. Let people speak for themselves. Let people design their own programs. Let people, use local solutions for these problems, because you are not always going to be there to write all of this stuff for them. They need to be able to learn something and be able to hold themselves up. I think the important thing is owning the solutions. Only the problem is there, and they need to own the solutions and design the program so that it works around them, using language that is protective, that is inclusive, that isn't, that doesn't make, like you were asking, what does MSM mean, right? Why would you own men who have sex with men? And like, is that all you are? Is sex who you are? No, it's not. It's just one of the things that make you who you are. And so I think that kind of language that comes in a script and tells you who you are is not right. And so I think from where I am, that's basically what we're trying to do, is to say, I have an opportunity because I work with governments. I can create platforms where communities are able to meet with government entities, so whether it's judges, parliamentarians, high-level officials in the different countries, and bring them together and say, Quinter, you have a story and you have a problem in Kenya. And you need parliamentarians whose responsibility it is to make the laws, to make the policies, to ensure that their budgets to improve access, to eliminate harmful practices, bullying, all of the stuff that you're talking about, and ensure that the laws actually protect rather than, otherize people or marginalize people. Make sure that judges understand that in Uganda, when they are faced with a group of 30 young people who were found in one house during COVID, they were not there to have an orgy. They were there because they are homeless. They've been told, COVID, you must stay, you can't be in the streets. And so they are in the same house, but the laws of COVID are saying you can't be more than so many. And why is the judge not realizing that all of these kids are queer, they are homeless, but instead, what do? They put them in prison. In prison, they are raped. They can't access some meds that are really important to them, but a judge is not paying attention to that, right? And so I think, those are some of the very practical issues that I think, context, understanding, and allowing people to actually speak their realities, and listening and hearing that as you draw up this script of the policy, those are important considerations, and just also declare your own power, the power of money, right? It's never going to be equal, but I think sometimes I think zethu was talking yesterday to say, money says you must report in this way, you must give receipts, you must do all of this stuff that sometimes it's impossible to even do. It takes up time. I was constantly tired, exhausted when I was at PI because I was chasing all of these accountability processes. Not that they are not important, but I think there are different ways of making sure that it works for us.
There's a way to apply that power,
yes,
that positionality that actually serves the community.
Yeah.
How would you approach that from the UNDP level, but also in your work at Pan African ILGA?
We go to school and we study, and I've studied extensively legal texts or scripts. And, a lot of these laws that we are talking about were literally a copy-paste from the British. And it was brought like that to, and it ended up criminalizing a lot of, the behavior that was there, and not just sexual behavior, many other things as well. And as we go to school, of course, that's part of the socialization that happens, right? And you accept that this is the law, and it must be enforced. And you add that to the script with religion, and it becomes even stronger because there's that fear, let's say the Catholic fear, some would call it, of God, of the wrath of God. And so put it together with police and God, and it becomes a very huge force that it's difficult to fight back. And we believe in it, and now we are enforcing it. It's become a culture in a way that supersedes the other culture that was a lot more flexible and a lot more inclusive. And so, working for the UN, it's kind of there are scripts that we all ascribe to. We drew up the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We drew up so many treaties. We drew up so many in reaction sometimes to crises, men created by human beings, and sometimes well-intentioned, but they have to be enforced by people. And I think that's where sometimes things go wrong. It's how these scripts are interpreted, who interprets them, who enforces them, and who are the subjects to be enforced over, right? So I think those are some of the things that I think as we think about all of these scripts or all these laws, all these treaties, is how do we apply them? We have the language of SDGs, and there again, it's a beautiful agenda, right? It's meant to eliminate poverty. It's meant to improve access. It's meant to, create equality and eliminate all the other discrimination, marginalization, and so and a lot of the stuff that make people live in poverty, and I think as I don't think they should be imposed on people. I think people need to be able to self-identify and decide what is priority for them, right? And each country has to decide for itself. Each communities in countries have to decide for themselves whether they want that particular script to be applied in totality, or they can pick one thing, and that thing has to be the thing that they want to concentrate on. And so that really means allowing people to self-identify, to self-determine, and write their own script within that other script, right? To kind of challenge or criticize or just adapt it for themselves, because of course our ways of lives are different. Our ways of communication is different. Just culturally, see, culture is not that bad thing all the time. There's lots in our communities as Africans that are really, really good. And so we cannot say culture is bad. There are lots of patriarchal stuff that we can dismantle. And there's a lot other good things that we can keep. And I think that's the spirit within which some of these scripts that we have decided that we are keeping, we have to decide how they are applied and how they can benefit, especially with marginalized communities. Because the universal way that we apply always leaves someone behind, right? It benefits the majority. And that means there's someone who's going to fall into that crack and be forgotten, right? And as a lot of LGBTI persons, sex workers, people living with disabilities, people living with HIV and so on and so forth, are those people that will be left behind. And so I think it's important that, we make sure that when we say leave no one behind, we are not just talking about a universalist way of looking at things, but rather very targeted, in empowering, especially, those who are regularly left behind.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that really brings this panel to a great sort of summarizing and a wrapping, looking also at the 4 R's. As you were speaking, I was thinking of the 4 R's because of rights, the language of rights. And I was thinking how, from an African perspective, we tend to look at responsibilities. As you were talking about the UN charters, etc., and the Declaration of Human Rights, that is a recent phenomenon. People tend to assume that rights are something that has just always been there in the language and the writing. But actually, this is very recent, written very recently. And communities survived thousands of years before that. Our indigenous African communities had a responsibility to each other. The language of rights also being attached to the individual versus a community. So if we're looking at the 4 R's, and it's something that I think we could share back and to close the session, what are the responsibility of organizations working in the space? Are they being responsible for the type of narratives they're creating? Are they responsible for the language that they use? Are they responsible genuinely with bringing everybody along? Looking at resources, who is funded? Who is the one in the lead of the grants that come for LGBTQ plus funding? Is it the Global South organizations? Is it grassroots groups? Are we really engaging from a position of equality? When we look at representation, who comes to the table? Do we give enough time for those groups to contribute to the multiple project proposals we write? And when it comes to a reality check, what does it mean to have a truly representative African approach to queerness that includes languages, that includes multiple identities, different ways of seeing the world, and different ways of identifying and defining self? Thank you for joining our conversation.